The US President Donald Trump has renewed his criticism of Europe's political leaders, calling them, quote, weak. Speaking with the news outlet Politico, he said European countries had failed to control migration and to end the Russia-Ukraine war. The comments echo his administration's national security strategy, which was released last week, which said that Europe faces major problems such as censorship and suppression of free speech.
They're not doing a good job. Europe is not doing a good job in many ways. They're not doing a good job.
I want to ask
you
about that. They talk
too much, and they're not producing. We're talking about Ukraine. They talk, but they don't produce. I think they're weak, but I also think that they want to be so politically correct. I think they don't know what to do. Europe doesn't know what to do. They don't know what to do on trade either. I mean, I look at a lot of the trade situation that's going on over there. It's a little bit dangerous, but Europe, they want to be politically correct, and it makes them weak. That's what makes them weak.
And Donald Trump has launched a sharp attack on Europe and its leadership, describing the continent as, quote, decaying and struggling under the pressures of migration while being led by weak politicians. In an extensive, wide-ranging interview with Politico following the release of the U.S.'s national security strategy last week, Trump also accused European leaders of failing to make progress in ending the war in Ukraine and refused to commit to support for Kiev.
Sie haben ja auch die Situation, dass Sie manchmal
ganz häufig.
Dass wir ganz so kniehohen Rednerpult.
Manches darin ist nachvollziehbar, manches darin ist verständlich, manches darin ist für uns aus der europäischen Sicht inakzeptabel. Dass die Amerikaner nun die Demokratie in Europa retten wollen, dafür sehe ich keine Notwendigkeit. Das, wenn sie zu retten wäre, das würden wir schon alleine hinbekommen. Die Frage, was das für unsere sicherheitspolitische Zusammenarbeit bedeutet, ist
Something historic is happening right now, something the world has not witnessed in decades. The global balance of power is shifting, and the nations that once dictated world politics are suddenly turning against each other. Two giants that built the foundation of the modern Western order are no longer united. Instead, they are trading accusations, clashing over economic interests, and engaging in a quiet but fierce battle for dominance. And at the center of this global storm is Africa. Yes, Africa, a continent once underestimated, undervalued, and overlooked, is suddenly rising, reshaping global alliances, and capturing the attention of every major power. What is unfolding today is not just a political disagreement, it is the collapse of an old world and the birth of a new global structure. For decades, Western nations moved in perfect coordination. They aligned their policies, reinforced each other's decisions, and acted as a single powerhouse controlling much of the global economy. When one nation made a statement, the other supported it. When one took action, the other followed. Together, they shaped world politics, but that era is over. The once solid alliance is cracking. Sharp disagreements, conflicting interests, and competing economic strategies are pushing these powerful nations apart. The partnership that once looked unbreakable is now fragile, unstable, and uncertain. Western capitals are frustrated, their partners are defensive, global observers are stunned, and Africa is watching with opportunity firmly in its hands. Because while Western powers are busy fighting each other, Africa is rising economically, strategically, and politically. For the first time, Africa is being recognized not as a follower, but as a global force capable of influencing international decisions. And the numbers tell the story. Africa is the fastest-growing economic region, home to the world's most promising future workforce, the next hub for global manufacturing, and the source of minerals. Powering everything from electric vehicles to advanced technology, the West is distracted by internal conflict. Africa is focused, Africa is organized, Africa is rising, and this rise is happening at the exact moment the Western alliance is breaking apart. The more the West fractures, the more Africa becomes essential. The more Western nations disagree, the more they turn toward Africa for resources, markets, partnerships, and political support. The world is shifting direction. For the first time, Western leaders are no longer looking exclusively at each other, they are looking toward Africa, because they finally understand a truth they ignored for years. Africa holds the markets of tomorrow, the minerals of the future, and the demographic power that will shape the next century. But here is the most unexpected twist. Africa is no longer negotiating from weakness. Africa is negotiating from strength. The old days of unequal partnerships are over. Africa is setting the terms. Africa is choosing its allies. Africa is deciding which global powers deserve access to its resources, its people, and its markets. The West assumed Africa would always be available. Always dependent, always predictable. But while they were busy with their own battles, the rest of the world moved in. Asia expanded its trade ties, the Middle East invested heavily, Latin America built new partnerships, multinational corporations poured billions into infrastructure, energy, agriculture, and manufacturing. Africa gained leverage, massive leverage. And now, as Western nations turn against each other, their unity splinters and their political certainty collapses, Africa is rising as the global balancing force, the swing power that can decide the direction of the world. While Western governments argue, African nations are signing megadeals, securing energy corridors, building manufacturing hubs, strengthening regional alliances, launching joint military initiatives, and hosting global summits, Africa has learned something powerful. The world needs Africa more than Africa needs any one partner. The internal divisions in the West only make this more obvious. They reveal cracks that were hidden for years, they expose weaknesses in the alliance that shaped global politics for generations, and they signal to Africa and the world that the old system is no longer reliable. When two global giants clash, the smartest strategy is not to take sides. The smartest strategy is to rise above them, and that is exactly what Africa is doing. Africa is not waiting for anyone's approval. Africa is not seeking validation. Africa is building its future while others destroy theirs. This is why Africa is rising, because while major powers argue, Africa builds. While alliances break, Africa strengthens its regional blocs. While the West challenges each other, Africa partners. With the world, while the old powers panic, Africa prepares. This moment is not just political, it is historic, a shift in the world's center of gravity, a transition from an old order to a new one. For generations, the world revolved around two centers of power. But today, those centers are weakening and a new center is emerging, a center powered by youth, innovation, natural wealth, regional unity, and global influence. That new center is Africa. A rising Africa, a strategic Africa, a confident Africa. As the Western alliance fractures, Africa is stepping onto the world stage not as a secondary player, but as a leader shaping the future of global politics and economics. The old world is fading, the new world is being constructed, and the architects of that new world are African. This is more than a political dispute, it is the dawn of a new era. A moment when Africa redefines its place in global power and when the collapse of old alliances becomes the spark that ignites Africa's historic rise. This is history unfolding, this is power shifting, this is Africa's moment, and the world is about to feel it. A shockwave ripples through global markets, diplomatic circles, and strategic headquarters around the world. The cracks in the Western alliance had already begun to show, but now the fracture is undeniable. The two powers that once moved in perfect synchronization are drifting apart, pulled by different agendas and clashing visions. And as their unity falters, the rest of the world realizes something far more significant is unfolding beneath the surface. Africa is stepping into the vacuum. In major Western capitals, analysts scramble to understand what is happening. Meetings turn urgent, reports pile up, economic advisors warn that the old models no longer apply. Something new, something unexpected is taking shape. For decades, Africa had been treated as a region to influence, a market to extract from, a space to shape. But now the script is flipping. Africa is becoming the force influencing others. Global powers are adjusting their strategies not to direct Africa, but to respond to Africa, and the clearest proof comes through a wave of decisions that shock Western leaders. African economic blocs strengthen their internal ties, trade within the continent surges, countries invest heavily in infrastructure that connects them to each other rather than outward. Manufacturing zones expand, technology startups rise across major cities, energy projects power communities that were once ignored, agricultural systems modernize. The continent is shifting from dependency to self-reliance. This isn't a short-term reaction, it is a long-term transformation. As Western nations argue among themselves, African nations coordinate. While Western trade relationships fracture, African markets consolidate. While Western powers question each other's loyalty, Africa sets new rules for engagement with the world, and the timing could not be more critical. Supply chains are unstable, markets are unpredictable, global demand for minerals, especially those needed for batteries, renewable energy, and advanced technology is skyrocketing, and almost every one of those minerals flows through Africa. Suddenly, Western nations find themselves needing Africa far more than they anticipated. Their internal divisions only make the situation worse. Each side now wants exclusive access, each side wants stronger ties, each side wants to secure their position before the other does. Africa holds the leverage. In high-level trade summits, African negotiators speak with a confidence that surprises even their own partners. They no longer soften their demands or compromise under pressure. They outline strict conditions, local production requirements, technology transfers, job creation mandates, and regional development obligations. Anyone who wants access to African markets will need to contribute to African growth. The West tries to push back, Africa doesn't move. The West tries to negotiate from strength, Africa negotiates from necessity, and necessity always wins. This shift reshapes global thinking. Western investors who once ignored African opportunities now rush to enter the markets, but Africa is no longer handing out blank invitations. It is choosing partners based on long-term benefit, not historical ties. Even more surprising is the political shift. African nations that once followed Western diplomatic positions begin charting independent paths. They make decisions based on their own interests, not external pressure. Their votes in global institutions carry weight. Their alliances carry influence. Their disagreements matter. The world is adjusting to a new reality. Africa is no longer a passive participant. Africa is a decisive actor as Western nations continue to clash. Their attention splits, leaving room for Africa to act boldly. Regional military alliances strengthen. Pan-African infrastructure projects accelerate. Independent financial platforms gain traction. Continental negotiations on manufacturing and energy advance. The momentum is unstoppable. Meanwhile, Western populations begin to realize something unsettling. Their leaders are losing influence. The political divide between the two major Western blocs grows deeper. Accusations fly across the ocean. Economic strategies contradict each other. Diplomatic statements clash. What once looked like unity now looks like rivalry. The world's most powerful alliance has become unpredictable, and in that unpredictable landscape, Africa becomes the stable alternative. International businesses shift headquarters to African cities. Tech companies open research centers across the continent. Energy corporations negotiate decade-long deals. Global manufacturers invest heavily in new African industrial corridors. The world moves, not toward the old centers of power, but toward the new one, Africa. The momentum is so strong that some Western commentators finally admit what has been clear for years. Africa's rise isn't accidental. It is the result of deliberate strategy, demographic strength, resource dominance, and expanding regional cooperation. It is the natural outcome of a continent investing in itself, but the most powerful shift comes from the people. A wave of confidence spreads across African populations, especially among the youth, who see themselves not as inheritors of global inequality, but as architects of a new global order. They launch companies, innovative technologies, cultural movements, and global brands. They break records, they break stereotypes, they break barriers. The new Africa isn't just rising, it is redefining what global power looks like. The world's geopolitical landscape bends around this new reality. Western unity weakens, African strength solidifies, global influence rearranges itself. Africa's leverage grows not because Western nations are split, but because Africa now stands on its own foundation. The old world depended on Africa's resources, the new world depends on Africa's leadership. And that leadership becomes undeniable when a major global organization releases a report acknowledging a truth the world has been avoiding. Africa is the fastest growing center of economic potential on Earth and the most influential region for the next century. This revelation sends shockwaves through Western institutions. They realize they cannot afford to ignore Africa. They cannot afford to underestimate Africa. They cannot afford to treat Africa as secondary. Africa is no longer a region to access, it is a region to respect. While the West fights, Africa rises. While old alliances break, new ones form on African terms. While global power collapses in one region, it consolidates in another. The world is changing, the center of gravity is shifting. And Africa is no longer watching history, Africa is making it. The world is shifting faster, deeper, and more dramatically than the old powers ever expected. And as global alliances fracture, as tensions rise, and as the pillars of Western unity shake, one reality becomes impossible to ignore. The center of global influence is no longer fixed, it is moving, it is evolving, it is recalibrating itself around a new force, and that force is Africa. For decades, global power flowed in one direction. Today it flows toward opportunity, stability, and future potential. It flows toward the continent, shaping new partnerships, negotiating on its own terms, and defining its own path forward. What began as a rift in the Western world has revealed a truth reshaping the entire planet. Africa is no longer reacting to global events, Africa is directing them. Economies are turning toward the continent. Diplomacy is being rewritten around it. Industries are grounding their future in it. And global powers are adjusting their strategies to align with a rising giant that can no longer be overlooked. This is not the world of the past. This is the new geopolitical map, one drawn not by old alliances, but by new realities, and Africa stands at the center of those realities. As the old order struggles with its own divisions, the continent builds its own momentum-stronger regional blocks, expanding infrastructure, rising industries, booming populations, and a new generation of leaders who see the future not as something to wait for, but something to create. The shift is already happening, the consequences are already visible, and the world is already adapting. Because the era of one-sided power is over, the era of global balance of new voices, new alliances, and new centers of influence has begun. And Africa is no longer a footnote in that story. Africa is the headline. So as we close this report, remember this: power doesn't disappear, it relocates, it reorganizes, it finds new ground. And right now, that ground is Africa. This is the moment the world will look back on as the turning point, the moment the global order truly changed direction. Thank you for watching GeoIS Report, your window into the world's shifting power, rising players, and unfolding geopolitical transformations. Stay aware, stay informed, stay ahead, because the future is already here.